From West Palm Beach, where the president continues his holiday vacation, not too far from where we are at his Mar-a-Lago resort. And despite the fact that he has been on vacation, he is keeping a close eye on these protests in Iran. And the administration is making it clear that they are standing with the people who have taken to the streets to protest against their government. In fact, the president himself using the powerful pulpit of his Twitter feed to send a clear message to those protesters. The president tweeting last night, quote, "Many reports of peaceful protests by Iranian citizens fed up with their regime's corruption and its squandering of the nation's wealth to fund terrorism abroad. The Iranian government should respect their people's rights to include their right to express themselves. The world is watching." And then he used the hashtag Iran protests. Now, the president's statement, which came late last night, echoed that of his State Department from earlier in the day. The State Department said that the United States supports the demands of its people in Iran for basic rights and an end to corruption. And of course, it's not a surprise that the president would stand with the people protesting against the Iranian regime. There's been a very tense relationship between the president and Iran. In fact, the United States believes that Iran is involved in the conflicts in both Yemen and Syria. And of course, Donald Trump himself has been very critical of the nuclear deal that was hatched with the previous administration. He campaigned against it and continues to say that he believes it should be reviewed and possibly come to an end. So this morning, the president of the United States making it very clear that the United States stands with the protesters and not the regime in Iran. Christy and Victor.
All right, Ryan Nobles, we appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, joining me now, Arwa Damon, CNN senior international correspondent, live in Istanbul. Also, Era Lewis, CNN political commentator and political anchor for Spectrum News. Also, Julian Zellers, a CNN political analyst, historian, and professor at Princeton University. Arwa, I want to start with you and these protests. There are also thousands of pro-government protesters who are out today in Iran. First, give us an idea of what is happening there, the conditions that prompted these protests, and the scope of these competing efforts.
Well, these demonstrations began Thursday night and then started really spreading throughout the course of Friday, not just in the capital, Tehran, but throughout the entire country. And in typical fashion, the Iranian government did respond fairly heavy-handedly. There have people who have been detained since the government says that the demonstrators did not obtain the necessary permits. And in response to these anti-government demonstrations, we are today seeing people coming out in support of the government. Now, those that have been taking to the streets, the anti-government camp, that is, it really presumably started out because of economic dissatisfaction. The country has been in something of a downward spiral, and the population to a certain degree did perhaps think that things would get better after the nuclear deal with the United States. They did not necessarily, at least not to the degree that the population would have liked to see. And then you have underlying issues, of course, that have been really the cause of a lot of dissatisfaction with how the government is handling a number of issues. There is a sense amongst a certain segment of the population that the government is focusing too much on foreign affairs as opposed to domestic affairs, an increasing sense of frustration that the government is too focused both financially and militarily and politically on what's happening in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and in Gaza as well, as opposed to trying to really focus on its own issues. But the government, for its part, is warning people that they should be careful when they go out into the streets, especially when they go out coming out in opposition of the government. They are accusing foreign agents as being the ones who are really trying to spark all of this at this stage, Victor.
Julian, it's interesting that the reason that this response, this statement from the president is pretty remarkable, because we have to contrast that with some of the statements, and those statements we did not hear from the president in relation to other world leaders in similar situations, giving high marks to Turkish President Erdogan even after the crackdown and that attempted coup in 2016 and the purging and consolidation. We did not hear this type of warning from President Trump in that situation, nor with the Saudis, nor with the president of the Philippines, and the list goes on.
It's true. It's a selective support for civil unrest. And this is a country that's been more on the radar for President Trump, and there's different reasons that he would support the regime becoming destabilized. other than human rights. Nonetheless, this could be something bigger. This could portend to more protests and the possibility of pretty serious unrest in the country. We don't know yet. But the inconsistency is a result of this not really being so much about the president's support of human rights, so much as his animosity for the Iran regime.